Board of Supervisors to order, please. We will please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
An adjourned organizational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse, 500 Forest Street, on Tuesday, August 22nd, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I would like to request everyone please silence their cell phones and any other electronic devices as to not to be an interruption to the meeting. And I thank you for your compliance. And we'll proceed to roll call. I'd ask everyone please sign in to open meeting. And we'll proceed, and I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening, including the viewing audience, and thank you for your interest in county government. And we will proceed on to item B, education presentation and/or reports, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any reports by any standing committee chairs or their designees? Okay, we will move on to item C, the consent agenda, items C8 through item C13C. And that is all of the consent agenda. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Langenhahn and seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Sherfinsky, please vote. Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is passed and is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item D, number 14. And before we get to the motion, I will explain a couple of things. First off, this was coming from last Thursday's agenda. And this was a motion to reconsider the appointment of Mr. Mortensen to the Rib Mountain Metropolitan Sewerage District. It was approved, and so we're at the point, there's a motion on the floor to approve Mr. Mortensen. A little bit of additional information. Supervisor Straub provided some information in an email directly to all of the board members. And I consulted with Corp Counsel. And two of those items that are included in that email, a correspondence or communication or information about Alexander Vedvik, and then Chris Vall is I would be ruling that those are not germane to the appointment of the individual, Mr. Mortensen, to the Rib Mountain Sewerage District. And so I would ask the board to refrain from any discussion on those two items. And with that, we are at the point of discussion on the motion to approve.
A point of order, Chair.
Just a second, please. Nobody put don't put any or press any buttons as far as a motion to approve or a motion or a second, because the clerk will be entering the motion as it was last month offered, prior to the motion to reconsider. So again, we are at the point of discussion. Supervisor Robinson made the motion. Supervisor Van Cray made the second to approve Mr. Mortensen to the Rib Mountain Sewerage District.
Yep.
Supervisor Straub, please.
Could we see the board, please, on the screen?
So any discussion? Supervisor Straub.
I guess as I mentioned to you, thank you, Mr. Chair. When the educational meeting on Thursday came about, information was brought forth by individual, Eric Donaldson, during public input. To me, it seems like kind of an ambushed style of delivering information for educational purposes, because it wasn't in the packet for us to preview, give any kind of scrutiny to and review, thereby setting us up with language in that submittal where he went and reached out to various presidents from different municipalities. To me, and should be to the rest of us, you voted on your convictions the prior month. If Mr. Donaldson wanted to really get to the bottom of what I had said that voting meeting, in last month's voting meeting, he didn't make any effort to reach out to me, and we could have substantiated my claims, and we could have sat down and went through the minutes from anybody's board minutes, whether Weston, Rothschild, or Cronenwetter, or county. He did go through the county minutes to find out that, they didn't approve the guy I want. So nobody's done any further investigation into any of these things that I said. I wish they would. Mr. Supervisor Sherfinski wanted to do that. I agreed with Mr. Sherfinski. Let's do that. And we were told by the chair that this was for the purpose of approving or not approving. And so we followed the direction of the chair, and this body, governing body, acted according to direction of the chair, approved by Corporation Council, and we voted our conviction, and the matter was settled. Now we're sitting here again tonight, unable to talk about anything, and that's fine. We have talked about it. The man was rejected from that position. If Mr. Donaldson is looking for a replacement, I'd be more than happy to sit on your commission. I see he's in the room. If you want to consider me for your commission, I'd be more than happy to interview. So I wish you would take me up on it, but I don't think he will. But I'm offering it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I represent one of 3 districts in Cronenwetter. much of my district is served by our water district, which includes the Red Mountain Sewer District. I personally have well and septic, so I don't have personal experience. But I wish I would have had more time to make this decision. I would like to see future appointments be taken in front of the Standing Committee of Jurisdiction. I made a rules review for that. It didn't get interpreted that way when it was sent out, but that aside, I have spoken to Eric, who I've known for 20 years, for about an hour, and I spoke to Joel Straw. Both of them called me and asked me to talk to them. I think they both made a lot of good points, and I want to say that I have not heard anything in my district negative about the sewer district. But when I campaigned to run, or when I campaigned for this position, I knocked on hundreds of doors in my district and asked, what are the issues? What do you like? What would you like to see? And the number 1 and 2 issues, with no close third, were the water quality problems and the stormwater problems. So the manganese in the water. Again, I haven't experienced that personally because I have well and septic. And people told me, they said, this has been going on for years. We cannot get any response from the village of Cronin Winter. Can you do anything about this on the county board if you get elected? And I said, I think this is a village issue. I will see what I can do, but I don't think that, that it's a county issue. So I didn't have enough time to go back and listen to the meetings that Joel had suggested that I listen to, but I did go back and look at 2019. Mr. Mortensen was on our utility commission. In 2021, I was running for office and being told that, the utility commission and the village board as a whole were unresponsive to my constituents. I got no calls on this from any constituents one way or the other, so I have no guidance, from that. But just based on it being a large problem in our community, the largest identified problem in our community, and the fact that there is some credibility for what Supervisor Joel says about, the response, I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Straub.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to piggyback on what Supervisor Baker has said. And I didn't take the time to go scrounge out the letter that came from the citizens who were angry, very angry that the village did nothing. The costs, as I pointed out a month ago, for us to have built the filtrate, many people knew it. I've known it. I've lived in Cronin Winter since 1993. I was born and raised in Rothschild. And Rothschild water, I drank it. It's good. It's got high PFA, 24 parts per trillion. Cronin Winter's got 2. Mr. Mortensen didn't even want to test for the PFAS at one point because he didn't want to create a panic. He didn't want us to find out that maybe we had high PFAS, and we don't want the people to know, because then what are we going to do now? We got all this other problems. We don't need that on top of this. But nobody, especially Mr. Donaldson, didn't reach out to me, the man that made the comment. I sat on the utility committee with the gentleman, Mr. Mortensen, and I got very, very interested because I've been dealing with this. I lived there for 30 years. And so there was a plan in place when I got appointed to the standing committee. And when Mr. Volk points out in his letter that Mr. Mortensen took control of finding well number 3. Well, well number 3 was identified in 1984 by an outfit called WEC, Wisconsin Engineering Corporation. And we know that that well point is going to put out 500,000 gallons per day, which is 250 short of what we would call adequate, but it will work for us. And we put in, when I was on the chair of the CLIP committee, Community Life Infrastructure and Public Property, I was reached by a constituent that said, Joel, you better put in wellhead protection overlay district map extension to cover that well site because the Bull Junior floodplain is being reevaluated and it's gonna, some of that might come out and there might be a dirty build right on top of our next wellhead. I noticed that Mr. Vole is giving Mr. Mortensen the credit for that. Now, if you wanted to, Mr. Donaldson, to review the record, you would find out when I pointed this out to the village board, President Vole shifted it from CLIP to the UC, the Utility Committee, where he took control of the narrative for that project, that he didn't give one
Supervisor
iota
Straub, Supervisor
of
Straub,
attention to you, sir.
please.
Yes.
We've got to talk about the appointment to the sewerage district and not his capacity as a member on the Utility Commission on the
Right. And
Croninwetter. And this is Corp Counsel telling me that you're on the line and are in fact over the line as far as discussion about Mr. Mortensen's credibility or his ability to serve on the Rib Mountain Sewerage District. Please.
Thank you. If I get off topic with it, Jermaine, please remind me, but I'm going to keep going until I nail this down. The vote came down last month and it was correctly, like I said, I will sit on, if they would consider me for a commissioner on the Rib Mountain Metro Sewerage District, I would be more than happy to sit down for an interview and try to solve problems. And I think Mr. Mortensen had ample chance to solve our problems, but I don't think he was energized because he's not a utility customer like I am. I'm probably the only Croninwetter utility customer sitting in the room right now. So I take this issue to heart, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. And I just don't think Mr. Mortensen, being on well and septic like Supervisor Baker, would have his whole heart into it like a paying customer will, because we are going to pay $2.5 million more for our filtration plant than we could have had back in 2021 or 2019. And that's the point I'm trying to make. The taxpayers of Croninwetter are going to be paying $2.5 million more for the same result at the end, from sitting on individuals in Croninwetter sitting on their laurels. So the vote from last month should remain. I'm voting against this. I wish I could vote 100 times against it, but I only got one vote. The vote was correct last month. It should be ended tonight with a no vote. Thank you.
Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know Mr. Craig Mortensen, but I guess, is he here? If he is, I was going to give him a chance to at least respond, but I guess if he's not here, I'll end my remarks.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish I would have asked this last Thursday when the administrator was here, but perhaps the chair or Administrator Holman might know. When this nomination comes in, or when this person was given to the administrator, do we know if the administrator did any additional research, or is it maybe his practice to just accept that nomination? Do we have an answer for that, perhaps? Like I said, I'm sorry I didn't ask it last week.
I don't have the answers to that question.
Okay, so I would say, kind of given that, I think we generally can understand how this works. If we made our vote and the motion to reconsider occurred, and we have additional information, and to me, all of the additional documents on both sides really provide me with nothing extra to change my vote from last time. I made the decision to vote no, and now all we have are people on both sides trying to add what really amounts to credibility questions and whether the person is viable and should be accepted for this position. So based upon that, I don't really have any concrete evidence to change my vote. So I'm going to vote no.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. At the original meeting, I voted no, and the reason I voted no was, as I stated at the time, was to try and give an opportunity, not as a rejection, but as an opportunity for more investigation, more information to come forward. Some additional information has come forward. I've had a good conversation with Mr. Donaldson, who I know and respect very well. We've heard from the two of the supervisors who represent the Kronen-Wetter area. I think what it comes down to is, as Supervisor Dickinson said, there's additional information, but there's nothing, there's no huge piece of information on one side or the other. The one thing that I do think is important is that I don't live in Kronen-Wetter, but I've now heard two supervisors who do represent Kronen-Wetter say that they are voting no. And that sways me tremendously. I mean, I'm listening to their constituents, and they believe their constituents in voting no, so I am going to support them in that. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make one comment. And preceding that comment, I want to highlight that, to the best of my knowledge, I've never met Mr. Mortensen. To be honest, living in a rural area, I'm outside of this sanitary district. I do want to just highlight that, I think that most of us have made up our minds coming into here this evening, but there's been quite a response from the communities that the sanitary district is comprised of. Since last month's meeting, we've received letters of support from the Red Mountain Sanitary District, the president of the Village of Rothschild, the village administrator from the Village of Weston, which communicates the Weston Village Board's support of the reappointment of Mr. Mortensen, and the village president from the Village of Kronen-Wetter. So, in the case of the appointed committee member, the committee of which that individual will be appointed to, they've not only went to bat for that individual once, but twice, communicating their support for that individual. So I think the response is very important here for you all to review in making your decision. Although, like I said, I think everybody's made up their minds coming into the meeting this evening, and I'd like to call the question. Thank you.
Question's been called. Is there any objection to question being called? Any objection to question being called? Is there a second? Seconded. We will proceed to vote on the question being called, which will end debate. There is one person in the queue. Supervisor Straub is in the queue. That will be the last if the question being called is sustained. So we will, just a minute, and the clerk will enter. We will be voting on the question being called and ending debate on the motion on the floor of the appointment of Mr. Mortensen. Okay, is everybody clear that we're voting on question being called and ending debate? That's all we're on. And so, is everybody clear? All right, we will proceed to vote on the motion of question being called. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And Supervisor Straub has the last discussion point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Langenhan just took the opinion of three people that they're opinionated. So I just wanted to point out that I was reached by a constituent, a Marathon County resident, who happens to be an electrical engineer, and he furnishes components for various large manufacturers in the area, and he's a specialized electrical engineer. And he and I have known each other since we were young. And I was telling him about the issue that happened last month with the appointment or non-appointment of Mr. Mortensen. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the term Rube Goldberg, but he used that phrase when describing the actions.
Again, we're talking
it's a-
about, this is outside of the purview of the appointment.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
sorry, I'm ruled out of order.
Thank you. But I will keep continuing to speak and say that Rube Goldberging is...
Now, sir, I'm saying you are out of order. You can appeal my ruling to the board, but I'm ruling you out of order. You will not continue to speak on that issue.
We will...
You can appeal my ruling to the board.
Does the
If you
board know
choose
that
to.
it needs a second?
The appeal does need a second. Is
Okay,
there a
I'll
second
change
to the-
my
is it-
thought process on that, Mr. Chair.
The
I still
clerk
have the
count?
floor. Do I still have the floor?
Yes, you still have the floor, but again, you
Correct
have
me
to
if I
make it
s-
germane to the appointment. And discussion with a third-party individual about electrical engineering has nothing to do with the appointment.
It was a reference to the character of the
I-
man, like the president said. You allowed that in, Mr. Chair. You allowed the opinion of village presidents in, and Mr. Supervisor Longahan and reinforced that he is swaying his opinion based on that, which was not submitted in the agenda, but was distributed during public input, which left each and every 38 of us with no time to prepare, as Supervisor Dickinson stated. So I am questioning the approach that was used in submitting the recommendations or the favorable, what would you call it? See what I'm getting at, Chair? You allowed that as a character.
Time out.
Thank you.
So when the vote was, and the administrator explained exactly the process he used when the board voted down Mr. Mortensen's appointment last month. He went out, he solicited information from Mr. Donaldson for a new appointment. Now, those individuals, Mr. Donaldson and all of the others, provided additional information that was brought into the packet after a motion to reconsider was voted upon by this board, and so that made it germane to the topic, because they are on point to his qualifications to the appointment to the Rib Mountain Sewerage District.
Thank you for the clarification. And as I continue with the costs associated with the filtration plant, the metering station, as I pointed out last month, we have a $500,000 metering station sitting there doing nothing. You can view it from Double X right before you get to Terabani off to the south. You will see a $500,000 brick building. That's a metering station. They never even tested the water to see if it's flowing right and check valves work or there's any leaks or any water will flow through there. That's a $500,000 of Cronenwetter taxpayer money or utility customer money wasted. The body, the governing body and standing committees of Cronenwetter are now approved last week, board, village board, the spending of $3.5 million on a filtration plant, which you add the $500,000 wasted on a metering station, that's $4 million. Had we acted on our manganese, high iron, biofilm, and other contaminant, dirty elements in our water, we would have had a filtration plant built for no more than $1.5 million. 4 minus 1.5 is a net loss to the taxpayers, utility customers of Cronenwetter of $2.5 million. That's the point I'm trying to ram home here without destroying anybody's character. I'm just trying to say that the citizens went over the governing body. Mr. Supervisor Baker heard that on his campaigning for signatures, his nomination papers. I heard it when I was out for running for supervisor for District 15, the same story. And now they have, the taxpayers of Cronenwetter have not really been told what is about to hit them. I listened to the board meeting from the last Monday's board meeting, and there's going to be a sticker shock coming. Believe me, folks, it's coming. And but they're being very careful about it, and I don't appreciate that approach by my elected officials, my staff members, or my standing committee appointees. And that's why I am voting no. And if I could vote 100 times no, it would be 100 times no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the debate is ended by the motion of question being called. And we will now proceed to the vote on the approval. The motion is to approve Mr. Craig Mortensen to the Rib Mountain Metropolitan Sewerage District. And is everybody clear what they're voting on? Supervisor Rosenberg, could you please vote? And we will proceed. And the motion is not carried. Moving on to the Extension Education Economic Development Committee resolution providing for the funding of the Marathon County Historical Society and McDevco in the 2024 annual budget. Resolution 42-23. Motion by Supervisor Seefeld and seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Supervisor Gisselman.
Yes, thank you. I will be abstaining from this because of my association with the Marathon County Historical Society. Thank you.
Your abstention is granted. Supervisor Rosenberg.
Yeah, I'd like to amend this resolution and lose the language that installs 8% less on than the amounts listed there. We're already lowering what we're providing for the McDevco and for the Marathon County Historical Society, as we don't have, we're not adding in anything for inflation. And I don't think at this time we should be treating our partners, longtime partners, by putting a target on them in the budget at this point. So I'd like to take out, I'd like to amend it by losing the two whereases that aren't darkened. The one at the bottom of the first page that says not less than 8% below the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget. Also on the top of the second page, the last sentence there, not less than 8% below the amount provided in the preceding year's budget, and reflect that in the fiscal note. I think those are the things that were changed in the E and D. I think the Historical Society provides us a sense of continuity and a sense of place. I think we don't do very much for economic development, and our primary thing is McDevco. And I'd like to see it, I'd like to see them funded at least at last year's level, which is actually a reduction. Thank you.
And that is a motion.
Yes.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Supervisor Zhang. Whoops, excuse me. Is there a second to the amendment? Supervisor Lemmer with the second to the amendment. So we will now debate the amendment as soon as the clerk gets the amendment in. Okay, now we are talking about the amendment, and the amendment removes the ability of, or the ability of the administrator to impose an 8% reduction from the 2023 funding level for the Historical Society and the McDevco. Supervisor Shafinsky with the discussion on the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. I will be voting no, and the reason why I will be doing that, Supervisor Rosenberg made the statement that we would not be, due to inflation, they will not see an increase. And that is very true, that's correct. But due to that same inflation, our constituents, all of the taxpayers of Marathon County are seeing a very real drop in real income over the last couple of years to the tune of 9%. This year, I don't know what the final numbers are going to be, but last year was about 9%. This year, it's probably going to be in the 6 or 7% range for the year. I think it makes perfect sense for us to be very careful with the taxpayers' money, and I think that any organizations that are getting funded by the county should be thankful that they're not seeing an actual reduction, because at the end of the day, everybody who's paying the tax bill in the county actually sees a reduction in their standard of living for the year. So I will be voting no. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also will likely be voting no on this amendment. It wasn't that long ago when we were discussing eliminating all the nonprofit funding from our budgets, and then our relationship, I believe, is improved for the better with those nonprofits that we currently have relationships with. However, I'm not going to vote on anything that I haven't seen in front of me, so I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to see this amendment displayed on the screen or printed out, something like that. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the Corp Counsel to at least provide on-screen a copy of the items in red that are asked, that the motion removes from the resolution.
Point of order.
Supervisor Baker?
I was on the list to speak, and I've been removed.
It was not, I did not touch the removal. I think you're numbered. You were on the prior one when, but this is a discussion on the motion to amend.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. So I'm not sure who was the next requester to speak, because I've got no name next to it. Okay. So for some reason, Crystal, Supervisor Bushman's name no longer appears, but Supervisor Bushman was the next to speak. Supervisor Bushman, please.
All right, thank you, Chair Gibbs. I am also on the EED committee. This was not a agreed upon. It doesn't speak for all of us. We were still debating this, I believe, in our meeting, and as Supervisor Sherfinsky did say, we're trying to address the economy, the increased spending, to reflect that for our constituents. So I'll be voting no.
Supervisor Lemmer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I reached out to Christy to just ask her what the impact would be on the taxpayer if we were to just get rid of the funding for, say, the Historical Society, and based on her math, it will save the taxpayer 83 cents if you own a $200,000 home. So cutting even just a little bit is not going to make that big of an impact, I don't think, for the average taxpayer, but it's going to make a huge impact for the Historical Society. So I would be voting yes on this amendment.
Supervisor Sandalski.
Thank you, Chair. First off, do I believe in nonprofits and their added value in this county? Yes, I do. Secondly, do I support nonprofits within Marathon County? Yes, I personally support a number of them with my own finances. There are many nonprofits, probably hundreds within Marathon County, that do so much great work. Honestly, it's not all that fair to cherry pick just a select few nonprofits to fund through the county while leaving out many other good ones that receive nothing from the county. I had one nonprofit actually approach me personally to ask if they would be able to receive some money for funding from the county. This one nonprofit would be a direct benefit to our jail and justice system for rehab purposes. Honestly, I would love to help this one out, but truthfully, the county does not have enough resources to support all of them within the county. It would be pretty hypocritical of me to support this one and to fund all the others. On top of that, why should taxpayers have to support financially nonprofits that they may or may not believe in? They can very easily support the nonprofits of their choice personally. Just like the other nonprofits who receive no money from the county, these select few nonprofits can find very creative ways of fundraising. Examples of fundraising ideas used by many within the county approach businesses, churches, and ask for support. Banquets, golf outings, 5K runs, raffles, auctions, etc. There's so many ways they can find support. Not only will this raise money for the nonprofits, it will also help get their name on the community more. Help in the form of bonds to the community, and would also promote their mission as a nonprofit. In our 2023 budget talks, there was interest in a plan to phase out the nonprofits. I am totally in favor of that. Well, last year we cut McDevco's funding by approximately 53%, from $85,000 to $40,000. And listening with the Triple EC meeting, one supervisor brought forth the idea of cutting the Historical Society by 50% as well. So I don't know how procedurally I could do that, but I would like to maybe later make a motion. Can we amend that later, or how does that work?
You can offer an amendment to the amendment.
Okay, I would like to offer an amendment to the amendment to amend Resolution 4223 to cut the Historical Society's funding by approximately 50% to a total of $28,000.
Is there a second to the amendment? Is there a second to the amendment? The motion is denied because of lack of a second. Back to the amendment as amended, or the amendment on the table, and that amendment is being now displayed on the screen. The red items highlighted are the items that are requested to be struck on the motion. So the motion is to strike the whereas that's highlighted in red, the two whereases, amend the one whereas to remove the not less than 8% below the amount of provided in the previous year's budget, and also removes that same sentence from the now therefore be it resolved clause. Is everybody clear? That's what the amendment is on the table, is to remove those items from the resolution. Supervisor Baker with the next request to speak.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So as was mentioned previously, we had this discussion at Triple ED, and we did pass it 4-2 in the form that's in the packet. And I want to point out that during that presentation, I said I hope that both the Historical Society, that we're able to fund both the Historical Society and McDevco at the full rate. It's not, the intention is not to cut the funding. The intention is, if we have to cut funding for the county board, for tax levy funded items, because to avoid tax increases that, may or may not be approved by the board, that I would like to be able to see, that the nonprofits could have the same level of cuts as the county board itself would make. During that discussion, Administrator Leonard took the time to say that he supported the now therefore be it resolved sections of this resolution over the original resolution which he drafted, which is what we're basically voting on going back to. So Administrator Leonard actually preferred to leave in the flexibility to, if he needs to cut it by 8%. I also think that this is not that much to ask compared to having a multiple hour debate at the budget meeting about whether we're going to cut out the nonprofits altogether. Basically, this was a good faith effort to say, let's have some flexibility if we need to for the budget, but I won't be, if this passes, I won't be bringing a resolution at the budget meeting to eliminate the funding. We'll have voted on it already. The point was also made that even if Administrator Leonard puts it in the budget, we have the opportunity to modify that. And I pointed out that, yes, at the budget meeting, that ran for 5 hours last year. So the goal is to try to get to a budget that we can all agree on, and this gives Administrator Leonard some flexibility. Now, I don't want to single out McDevco and the Historical Society. I want this to apply to all the nonprofits. We have amendments that we'll be offering for the other resolutions. So that, in my mind, it makes, and I guess people can have preferences, but what I'm going to do is vote for the same flexibility for every nonprofit, so that Administrator Leonard has the flexibility to keep them funded as they were, or if need be, not the preference, but if need be, that they could be cut by 8%. Thank you.
Supervisor Rosenberg.
Yeah, this doesn't help the budget. I mean, between the two of them, what do you got, $1.50, $1.60? That's pocket change. It says to these nonprofits that we don't value, and I think that's the message that's getting sent out.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question regarding the language, question for Corp Counsel, if he would. In the whereas, those two, the whereas and the now therefore, be it resolved, the statement is, in the 2024 annual budget process at a level up to the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget. Can I accept that as stating that the administrator could offer a 25% reduction? Because it's not equal to, it is up to. So removing the 8% allows the administrator to offer something less.
That's how I would read that language, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I would just state regarding the resolutions, the only concern I have with the resolutions is that if we paint the language in the resolution a certain way, it restricts what we can do in our budget discussion. I mean, if there was, I guess this would be another question. If we say that the resolution says we are going to provide at a level that is equal to what was in the preceding budget, can we, in our budget discussion, reduce that, even by 1%?
Yes, you can. The reason is I interpret these resolutions as direction to the administrator on how to build his budget, but ultimately the decision on how to fund those nonprofits is a separate decision for the budget for this board.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Bushman, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. It's frustrating to hear that kind of language when I hear that it's not going to make that big a difference, so don't do it, especially when it's $54,000. We talked in our meeting also how some constituents are going paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. So as a homeowner, a wife, managing my own economy and our own budget at home, if I were to just say, well, it doesn't make that big of a difference, just don't do it, that frustrates me, because we all should make, every little impact does help. So I'm hoping that doesn't make it the only reason that you choose not to, because what's $54,000? Thank you.
Supervisor Krause, please.
Thank you, Chair. In previous board meetings, we heard from the heads of these nonprofit organizations, and they told us how hard it was for them to manage their budget. And they said that in order to get monies matched, they had to have a certain amount of money from the government, or they couldn't get a matching amount to keep their nonprofit running. And they also talked about how their service kept the county from exploding with additional services, like calls for crime, calls for domestic violence, just a whole lot of other things that it would put a huge burden on the county. And we would have to add more money to certain programs because their nonprofit wasn't going to be helping because they have less money. And then as far as donations go, money is tight. I would assume that their donations are way down. Everybody's having a tough time with money, most people are. And they're probably not getting the donations that they used to, especially after COVID, especially with the school systems going the way it is, and after COVID and so on. So I don't see that this would be a good idea to reduce any funding because we've already reduced it before. So I don't think we should reduce it again. Thank you.
Supervisor Stravinsky, and I'll remind the board, we're talking about the amendment that removes the 8% flexibility that is on the, that's the discussion that we're talking about. Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that we need to refocus on the fact, both in the original resolution and this amendment, we're not talking about, in the original resolution, there's no discussion there that directs a decrease in the budget amount for these nonprofits. It allows the resolutions direct the nonprofits to be funded at the amount that they were funded at last year. That's not a decrease. That is the same level as they were funded for 2023. So I think we need to bear that in mind and have a good, clear-eyed look at what we're seeing. The fact that there's not an increase does not make it a decrease. It just means you get the same as you did last year. The wording in the original resolution that states that the administrator may also decrease up to 8% or reduce the amount by 8% was in there just to provide flexibility depending on how the rest of our budget discussion goes. As Supervisor Krause pointed out, everyone is tight. Everybody is having difficulties in terms of balancing their budget compared to where they were 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it behooves us to keep that in mind and just focus on the fact that nobody's calling here for a decrease in their funding. We hope we don't have to use it. It just provides a mechanism if the entire budget has to undergo that process, that they share in that pain, if you will. Thank you.
Supervisor Boots.
Call a question.
Is there objection to question being called? Any objection to question being called? Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Vensky. Just a second, the clerk will create the motion. Okay, there was no one in the queue at the time, Supervisor. All those, we're going to proceed to the question being called and end debate on the amendment. And is everybody clear what we're voting on? Again, we're voting on ending debate only. We're ending debate. So yes vote with a 2/3 majority will end debate on the amendment to the amendment. Excuse me, amendment, just the amendment. Is everybody clear?
Yeah.
So again, we are voting on the motion to question being called just to end debate. Is everybody clear? All right, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, debate is ended. We are now at the vote on the amendment. The amendment, again, removes the whereas, the second from last whereas, and the third from last whereas, and also removes the and not less than 8% below the amount provided in the preceding year's budget in the final whereas, and also in the final now therefore be it resolved. Is everybody clear on what you're voting on? The voting is on the amendment to remove those. A yes vote and a positive in the yes will remove those items. A no vote will, if successful, will remain and leave them in. Everybody clear? We'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion failed. And we'll proceed to now, as original motion is on the table. Any further debate? Supervisor Boots?
Call the question.
Any objection to question being called? Any objection to question being called? Is there a second to question being called?
Second.
Second by Supervisor Cavelli. Any discussion? It's not debatable. And so question has been called, and there's a second. So now we will be voting on the ending debate on the original motion. And that was the original. So again, we're just voting on the motion of question being called to end debate. A yes vote will end debate. A no vote will allow debate to continue. Is everybody clear? We will proceed. As soon as the clerk is ready. Thank you. Supervisor Robinson, please. Do you know how you want to vote? Vote aye. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and debate is ended. Now we are at the motion to approve the resolution as presented in the packet. Is everyone clear now what you are voting on? Now you are voting on the resolution as it's printed in the packet, and that is as stated, totally as stated in the packet. Is everybody clear? We'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Opal and Supervisor Robinson, yes. Okay. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. We will move on to Health and Human Services Committee. A resolution provide for funding of the North Central Community Action Program and the United Way 211 in the 2024 budget. Resolution 43-23. What is your Supervisor Zhang with a motion, Supervisor Vensky with a second. Supervisor Crivelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I stated at our informational meeting last week, I'll be bringing forth this resolution. I'd like to make a resolution to R43-23.
And your amendment is?
The amendment is in the, and I think I emailed it to the clerk, if you want to bring it up, if you can. In the now therefore be it resolved paragraph and the fiscal note paragraph, it'll be similar to the one that was in the last resolution, which will allow the amended version to give the administrator more flexibility in putting together the budget, which he agreed with. Now therefore be it resolved that Marathon County Board of Supervisors directs the administrator to provide for funding in the administrator's proposed 2024 annual budget to NCCAP and United Way 211 in amounts at a level up to the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget and not less than 8% below the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget. The fiscal note paragraph passage of this resolution would direct the administrator to include in his proposed 2024 annual budget funding for the two listed nonprofit agencies at a level consistent with the funding provided in the 2023 budget at a level up to $33,757,000 to NCCAP and $40,000 to United Way 211. However, any amounts actually allocated to each nonprofit organization must be approved as a part of the 2024 budget.
The Corp Counsel would like to explain what's on the screen.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So after Thursday's meeting, because Supervisor Crivelli had let the board know that this amendment was coming, I did draft how I heard it, and I think it reflects what you just said. So if you can confirm that that language is right.
Yeah, after United Way 211 in amounts, and then this is where it changes, at a level up to the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget.
Okay, so we just want to be clear, is the amendment that's being shown on the screen consistent with the author?
And so it should say at a level up to the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget, if that's on there. Okay. And not less than 8% below the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget.
Correct.
Then we're good.
Okay. So, we have a second. We're at debate. Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is more a question. I note that if you look at item F, we have a resolution providing for funding for North Central Community Action Program.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? We're having a problem with our software. I need a motion and a second on the amendment.
I will second Mr. Supervisor Crivelli's motion.
Thank you. And so let me have the clerk insert the amendment, and so we can get to discussions phase, please. All right, now we can go with individuals requesting to speak. Supervisor Stravinsky.
Okay,
And I apologize.
No problem. We got to get the details right. Okay, so this is more a question than it is a statement. We look at item F, resolution providing for the funding of North Central Community Action Program and United Way 211 in the 2024 annual budget, resolution 4323. Then if you step down to item H, Public Safety Committee, we have the same statement, and it ends with resolution multiple organizations, and the North Central Community Action Program in the 2024 annual budget, Resolution 4623. It appears that we've got this program in here twice.
So the clarification is that it came from two different committees. It is the same funding, so it's identical. So the hope is that the amendment, either the committee chair can remove the second committee when it comes up, can either remove it or make the same identical amendment to that resolution so that they are identical and it is from two different committees. But it effectively should have been two separate committees, or two committees, or one that brought forward the same in the funding for that one nonprofit, because two committees took it up. Yeah, so the suggestion is if the amendment passes here, you make the amendment to the second one, or you amend it by removing the second one, and this one would stand. Is that clear?
Thank you, Chair. That makes it very clear.
Supervisor Lamont, please.
Call the question. Thank you.
Question's been called. Is there any objection to question being called? We have one person on the queue, Supervisor Dickinson. Any discussion, any objection? Is there a second to question being called? Supervisor Vensky with a second. Question's been called. That will end debate other than the person by rule in the queue. In the queue is Supervisor Dickinson. He will be allowed to address after the vote is taken if debate is ended. If debate is not ended, we will continue. Supervisor Dickinson will still be brought in. Is everybody clear what we're voting on? We're voting on ending debate again. All right, we will proceed to vote on the motion. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Debate is ended. Supervisor Dickinson is recognized as the last individual to address the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only question I had is in the fiscal note, if it does pass, there's that minimum of 8%, which really should be included in there because it says up to a certain amount, but really you would have a minimum threshold that would have to be added. Is that correct?
I see what you're saying. The minimum would be that amount minus 8%. The fiscal note, candidly, is written by whoever drafts the resolution, and I think you could add that if you wanted to. I don't think it necessarily is required because it would change the effect of the resolution. So I can tell you with this particular fiscal note, I did not do that amount minus 8% because I'm a lawyer and I'm bad at math. Thank you.
Okay. So now we are at the point of voting on the amendment to the resolution to include the flexibility of up to 8% reduction to those two nonprofits. Is everybody clear on what we're voting on? And we'll proceed. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to a resolution recommending the provision. Now we have to vote on the motion as amended, excuse me. So we are now at debate on the motion as amended. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the motion as amended. Getting good at this. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. Now we will move on to the Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee, a resolution unencumbering unused ARPA funds, Resolution 44-23. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Hart, seconded by Supervisor Shafinsky. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. And we will proceed to the next item, resolution approving the 2024 potential capital improvement program projects. Resolution 45-23. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Mask and second by Supervisor Zhang. Supervisor Shafinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just a clarification on the word potential capital improvement projects. That would mean, in my mind, that means project could be stricken from that list?
Absolutely.
Project.
There's no funding tied to any of these programs or any of these projects at this point. And so that has to come back to this board for discussion at a future point when funding has been allocated.
I wasn't done.
Excuse me.
Or potentially projects could be added to the list, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
To follow up on his question, again, this is guidance to administration of the universe of potential projects, and invariably there are always some that come in at the last minute or beyond the capital improvement plan adoption, and then it requires a 2/3 vote at a later date. But what will happen from this process forward is that they'll begin to look at what resources are available. The board's gone on record as saying we're not going to borrow. So there won't be borrowing involved in it. They'll look at funding sources, what we can we leverage, how will we apply and use ARPA funds and other things, and ultimately the decision will be yours when we're into the budget. But this is a starting point, and we've already raised a number of questions at Human Resources, Finance and Property relative to the return on investment and other things. We're looking for clarification. So the final list will be one that will be without debt, and within the budget priorities and assumptions that we've adopted, and you'll have a chance to take out, put in other projects, but ultimately we have to pay for them.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So if I understand it correctly, the purpose of this resolution is to get feedback from the board about the items on that. And so I have a number of comments. And I offer them for discussion and consideration. I'm not saying that, that these are things that need to be added, just for discussion. So I want to start with some reasoning behind some of the items I'm going to propose, which basically some number of years ago, the state was in a fiscal difficulty and needed to raise taxes. And the way that they approached that was they closed all the waysides down in the state. I don't remember how many years ago that was, but I remember that happened. I don't remember if they closed the state parks as well. But essentially the plan was to make the citizens have pain so that they would agree to raise taxes. My approach is the opposite of that. I want to fund things that are valued by our citizens and our residents, and I want to maybe, if we need to, delay funding on things that may not be valued by our citizens and residents. So I I would say that I would like to fund, I would like to fund most of the parks and recreation projects. I know that there's not universal agreement on that, but in the light of, I think those are valued by our residents and our citizens. So I would support most of those, if not all of those. I would not support, I would support the Lakeview remodel of approximately $5 million, but only if we sell properties that we're going to vacate before so I would like to get those properties sold. If, HR Finance determines a plan, get that money in, and then do that remodel. And I know the objection will come up that we can't do that because we're using those buildings, but we just spent $700,000 on buildings that we gave the current tenants long-term leases or some length of leases. So I'd like to see us sell those buildings with, say, a 1.5-year lease back, or however long that it takes us to move out. And when we get those buildings sold, then we can finish the renovation and move. I don't see as much value in having empty buildings, renovating another building, moving, and then have a building sit empty for 5 years till we were able to sell it. That again, that's my opinion. I think that we should save ARPA funding for the $600,000 that North Central Healthcare identified as things we haven't been paying for that we need to pay for the next 3 years. So I'd like to see like $1.8 million ARPA funding saved for that. I think the board as a whole, there's a high level of support or angst that the state has taken away $1 million from North Central Healthcare. And I don't think that there's a high probability necessarily that we're going to get that back, although we should make our best effort to get it back. But in lieu of that, we have ARPA money. I'd like to see a couple million, one for each year, set aside to make up that for the loss of nursing home revenue. So that's approximately $4 million, $5 million. There's probably some reserve. So I could see using about $8 million, $7.5, $8 million for project funding, CIP funding. I think if we take out the Lakeview renovation, I think that pretty much covers what was in there, other than highway. And I don't understand how, what part of highway gets funded from highway funds, what part gets funded from tax levy. So I can't speak to that. I don't have that analyzed. I have questions about the library, the funding for the library HVAC system, and so perhaps someone can answer that when I'm done speaking. Is I don't understand if we are responsible for the maintenance on the Wausau branch, but we are not responsible for the maintenance on all the other branches. I'd like to know more about how that works. It doesn't have to be at this meeting, but at some point prior to the budget, because it appears to me that we take responsibility, or have the responsibility for one branch maintenance, but there was a request by Mosinee to fund $75,000 or something for window replacements, and that wasn't our responsibility. So I just would like to have more information on that. And then the last thing that I am going to say is probably going to be that I would like to see, there's $2 million plus CIP carryover, and I would like to see that if we need to use that to make up prevent tax increases, make up any losses for the nonprofits, if we need to use that to balance the budget, that we consider changing our CIP carryover rules so that we could use that to avoid tax increases and avoid loss, avoid having to cut the nonprofits funding. But if we don't have to do that, and we actually have enough money to do the other things, I would like to see us earmark some of that CIP carryover for the ice rink for future. We can't really use ARPA funding for that because I don't think it's going to happen in time. But if we, if we do have enough to do that, I would, I was thinking like $1.5 million. That would get us, a big chunk of, if we go, and that's again contingent upon agreeing that we don't spend more than 15% of the capital cost by the county, that we get 85% from outside parties, not necessarily private parties. It could be school, it could be other municipalities, but so thank you for your consideration.
Okay, I'll answer one of the questions I have to answer, and that is the library HVAC system. The Wausau branch library is owned by the county, and the other facilities are owned by the municipalities in which those branch facilities are in. And that was the agreement that was entered into with those municipalities when those branches were built. And so the operation and the maintenance of the Wausau branch is ultimately the county's responsibility. The county owns that building, and the other municipalities, in this case, the one you brought up, Supervisor Baker, was the Mosinee issue. That building is owned by the city of Mosinee, as the other branches that are out there.
Can I have a follow-up question for that?
Go ahead.
So what as far as operating costs like heat, light, electricity, who covers that for the branches?
I'll let the Corp Counsel answer that because he's dealt with those agreements.
Sure. I actually would have to look at those lease agreements. I can do that and get you that answer. I believe that each municipality is responsible, but I can take a look at that and get that answer to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Boots, please.
Yeah, so I have a couple of things of that. I was not at the educational, but I did watch some of it, especially with the CIP. So they have steam boilers. From what I'm gathering with the $4.9 million down at Lakeview, they're steam boilers. I've actually got the firsthand experience to look at these nice World War II relics. These are steam boilers. 10 years ago, we should replace these. So I guess I would compare it to simplify it. If you have a home now, you have two homes. We're saying, I guess what Supervisor Baker is saying is we have two properties. We're going to sell one before we can work on the other one. If I have two homes, and I do have money, it's not like we're broke, and I have a, let's say a fuel oil burner in my house that's about 50% efficient, or I go to LP, which is going to be about 95 plus efficient, so the payback on that is very short term. Those are the things that, again, were policy, not implementation, that our staff looks into. To say we're not going to spend money on something because we need to sell something before we do it is ludicrous. We should have done this a long time ago because the return on investment on this is really, really quick. Steam boilers are outdated, very outdated. There's also, I heard, sprinkler system is part of that CIP. There's a lot to this. So we're just saying, yes, we should look at it as a CIP. We're not saying we have to do it, but they're saying you guys need to look at this. So I guess that's all I really had to say about it. Just wanted to simplify it down in my brain. Being in the HVAC and in the trades, this is a no-brainer. So, thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you. Supervisor Baker, raised some important issues relative to the non-capital projects relative to North Central Healthcare. I don't think we're done there. I think we'll be looking at that. But remember that the budget itself will be looking at all revenue sources, and all the committees have been tasked with looking at the fees, fines, forfeitures, to look at, see if we can generate additional money to support the programs. We'll be looking at where the new shared revenue payments from the state will go. We'll look at where the net new construction of about 2.73% will go. So there are a number of opportunities for us to capture revenue to fund some of those other activities. But I would encourage the board to just allow us to continue to evaluate those. We know that there will be a number of projects that fall off. One of the things we're looking at is the Eau Claire Dells. There's a dump station. A dump station for approximately 30 campsites. if we lower the number of campsites, can we avoid putting in a very costly dump station that will serve relatively few people at a very high cost? We're also looking at how do we get a rate of return on those investments at our parks to make sure that they're basically depreciated and pay for themselves going forward, so we're not continually using levy dollars or capital dollars for those. That's going on. We're trying to evaluate our rolling stock policy. We haven't increased our rolling stock in the Sheriff's Department, highways or parks in, I think, 13 years-ish. It's been a long time, and we're just not buying as much equipment. So all of those will be looked at and evaluated, but again, this is the starting point for those discussions. And there are other revenue sources that will be available to us as we prepare the budget, and the administrator will be presenting that jointly to the county board and the finance committee later in September for our review, and ultimately it's a decision of the board.
Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back to the issue that Supervisor Baker raised, and that is that he raised the point that we don't want to have the county in the business of owning empty buildings. And I think that while making very prudent investment changes in facilities where we can substantially increase efficiency makes sense, we also have to look at the fact that we do not want to be owning vacant property. And if you look around the metro area, there's a lot of vacant property. So I think it is prudent that we set ourselves some goals that say, yes, in an ideal world, yes, let's fix up this first property before we move into it, and then we'll move, and then we'll sell the vacant one. Well, it's not our money. My neighbors did that, by the way. They bought a house, and they spent another $300,000 renovating that house before they were able to move in. They could carry that. Most of our taxpayers can't afford to do that, so we shouldn't do that on their back. Thank you.
I will just remind the board that, and I appreciate the comments made by Supervisor Baker about looking at that, and HR Finance Committee is looking at a policy around the excess properties, not only potentially River Drive, but also the social services building, along with in excess of all of the potential tax deed properties, and how do we move forward with a policy that is cohesive and is in the best interest of the taxpayer. So I appreciate those comments. I think HR Finance is actually looking at what is our disposition policy. Do we look at, is there a potential of an income stream by those properties? We don't have those answers yet, but I think having those discussions are absolutely prudent. Supervisor Sandulski.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I got a question in relation to the budget. It's kind of similar to it, but so we're looking at $45 million in our CIP projects. I'm just curious, as I look at the debt, we got over $100 million to the county in debt. I'm just curious, do we have a plan for paying that debt back, as far as like a 10-year plan, 5-year plan, or I just wanted to get a kind of feel what the plan is to get that debt paid off.
Those debts, when they were taken on by the board, were approved and required to set out with a maximum. Some of those debts are set up on a 10-year payback. Some of those debts are set up on a 20-year payback, 20-year being the maximum by state statute that can be allowed. And so, yes, those were all taking into consideration under the debt structure that the board took up. Supervisor Baker is next.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I was kind of waiting till people were done talking before I made this, but I would like to, and I'm not sure what the proper format is, I would like to make a motion or amendment to send this back to HR Finance Committee. I think the intent is to get input from the board, and I think we can provide that, but actually voting on it, I don't necessarily see the purpose of yes, we agreed to something that we know is going to change. So I'm glad it was brought forward. It was very helpful, and it's an area of discussion. But I think it's going to go back to HR Finance to be discussed anyway. Then I think that's what we should be voting on. So I will wait and make that motion after everybody's spoken. But I guess I'm looking for guidance as to what the right format for that is.
Sure. That's a motion to commit or refer to the HR Finance and Property Committee. That would be the motion.
Okay, Supervisor Boots is next.
So I was going to call the question, but it would not be a good time to do this for, now that Baker has said that, so I will not say that.
Okay, is there any other discussion? Supervisor Robinson, please.
A question to Corp Council. I know historically we've always adopted a KIP as part of our budget planning process to give direction to administration. Whether you do or you don't, it doesn't affect the final KIP. This is basically giving sort of direction to them. I think it's doing what you are asking without committing you to support the projects at the end of the day. Is there? I'm trying to remember in the ordinance. Is there a requirement for us to bring a preliminary KIP?
I don't believe it's in our ordinances or state statute. It is a directional document, as you indicated.
And past practice.
That is correct.
Any further discussion? Supervisor Baker, please.
I would like to make the motion to send it back to HR Finance per the language that Michael Corp Council provided.
The motion is to commit back to HR Finance. In having a discussion with Corp Council, one of the questions that I raised to Corp Council was, is there a request or direction by Supervisor Baker that he wishes the HR Finance Committee to take up on the list of the items? Because we have, in effect, discussed those items now, provided in the discussion, I think provides some of the feedback that the administrator was looking on these projects. So I'm asking for a point of clarification if there's specific direction that Supervisor Baker is wishing to have on the motion to commit.
I'm basically asking that HR Finance consider the points that were made during the discussion tonight. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, I'll try again.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Wilhelm for the motion to commit back to HR Finance Committee as the amendment, or excuse me, as a motion to commit, which will effectively dispose of the motion on the table. And so there's a motion. Is there any discussion on the motion to commit and refer back to HR Finance Committee? Supervisor Boots.
So essentially, we've had our educational meeting where it was discussed. Now we're discussing it again, and now we're going to send it back to committee. I think this is kind of an overreach. I guess my question is this. We've now had the administrator and the assistant administrator hear what we've had to say on these things. It's just giving them a direction. I don't know why we're sending this back to a committee. We're giving a direction. They've heard what we've had to say. If it can change, we can change it through the finance. All right. I will not be voting for this because I think it's a waste of time. So.
Supervisor Hart, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In bringing this back to committee, I would request that Supervisor Baker attend that meeting because we did discuss this. We discussed one of these meetings went 3 hours because Deputy Administrator Holman, I think that was an hour and a half presentation where we discussed this pretty lengthily. So I think if we're going to make these motions to send them back to committee, I ask for people to attend those committees, especially when we've discussed this twice at these committees. Thank you.
Supervisor Lamont, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I call the question.
Is there objection to question being called? Is there any objection to question being called? Supervisor Shafinsky with an objection, or was that a second?
That is an objection.
That's an objection. Is there a second to question being called? Supervisor Zhang with a second. It is non-debatable. We will proceed to the question being called. Again, we are voting on ending debate on the amendment to refer back to committee. Is everybody clear on what you're voting on? Supervisor Baker was in the queue, and he will be allowed to address the board prior or after the vote to end debate is voted upon. Is everybody clear what we're voting on? Again, ending debate on the motion to refer. Supervisor Zhang was the second. And we'll proceed to vote, please. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried. Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. 2 points. One, I would be happy to attend the HR Finance meeting. The second one is, actually, I would, if I knew how to do it, I would say we could send like the whole thing to Lance, to Administrator Leonard and the Vice Chair, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to incorporate that into, we talked about making a motion, but we have discussion, and I just don't know how to make a motion to do that. We're either sending back the original motion, which is not reflective of the discussion tonight, or we're sending, I can't rewrite the whole thing this evening, so I don't know. I don't know what the procedure is, but I think it's a gap in I think it's an area for HR Finance to look at, or someone else. I'm not trying to lay it on them. In future budgets, I think it's a weakness in our system that needs to be improved, I guess. So, thank you.
Okay, is everybody clear on what we're voting on? Voting on referring the list back to the HR Finance Committee for additional work. Again, the list does not, at this point, does not include any funding and does not include any priorities as it's provided. But the motion is to refer back. So is everybody clear on what they're voting on? We'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is defeated. And we are now at the motion to approve the list of the CIP list. Supervisor Boots.
Call the question.
Question is called. Is there any objection to question being called? Any objection? All right, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Rosenberg. Any discussion? Oh, excuse me, it's not debatable. Again, the motion is to end debate on the CIP list approval. Everybody clear on the vote? The vote is on ending debate. We will proceed to vote, please. And we'll proceed. Motion is carried. Debate is ended. There was no one in the queue. We will proceed to vote on the motion to approve the CIP list as presented. And we'll proceed. The motion is carried, and we'll move on to item Public Safety Committee, H19, a resolution to recommend the provisions of funding for Judicare mediation, the women's community, and the North Central Community Action Program in the 2024 budget. Resolution 46-23. Motion. Motion by Supervisor Vensky, seconded by Supervisor Mask. Any discussion? We have Supervisor Wilhelm, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to make an amendment to the original. So in the statement, it'll say, now therefore be it resolved that the Marathon County Board of Supervisors directs the administrator to provide for funding the administrator's proposed 2024 annual budget to Judicare, the women's community, and NCCAP in amounts at a level up to the amount provided for in the preceding year's budget and not less than 8% below the amount provided for the preceding year's budget. And in the fiscal note, the passage of this resolution would direct the administrator to include in his proposed 2024 annual budget funding for the two listed nonprofit agencies at a level consistent with the funding provided in the 2023 budget at a level up to $15,000 to Judicare, $55,000 to the women's community, and $33,757 to the NCCAP. However, any amounts actually allocated to each nonprofit organization must be approved as part of the 2024 budget.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Supervisor Marash. Is there any discussion? Okay, I will have the Corp Counsel please explain the amendment, and it is being presented on the screen.
Sure. So similarly, I took direction from the last meeting. I think I captured exactly what you just said. This mirrors what was in the last amendment as well. So it does adopt that language that you just proposed.
And again, for point of clarification, as Supervisor Stravinsky clearly pointed out, this is a duplication for the one nonprofit, but this is not funding them at two levels. It is funding them at one level, consistent with both resolutions. Supervisor Stravinsky.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. To clear up that confusion, I would like to offer an amendment that strikes the North Central Community Action Program from Resolution 4623, so that we basically eliminate that possible confusion point. Thank you.
Is there a second to the amendment? Supervisor Marash with a second. Is there any discussion on the motion to remove North Central Community Action Program from this resolution? And I'm assuming, and I want a point of clarification from Supervisor Stravinsky, and that is also included any reference to the funding and or potential reduction to that from this resolution as it pertains to North Central Community Action Program.
That is correct, and just for an additional point of clarification, that is in no way affecting the resolution that we voted on under item F. I'm not trying to remove it there. I'm just trying to isolate it to one point rather than two.
Yep. You're removing it strictly from the resolution 46-23 and not the other resolution. And so the second is good. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
I was in the queue.
They were in the queue on the previous motion, not the motion to amend.
I was on that one too.
You're on this one. Supervisor votes, please.
And now it says, something is at the right. So I just wanted to comment as Chair of Public Safety that I will not be supporting any amendments on this at all. It's a 7-0. When we had brought this forward, there's more to this resolution than people are voting on right now. And we're not respecting the standing committee level. So if we're not going to do that, let's not have standing committees, because it's wasting everyone's time. We keep doing this over and over and over, passes committees, we go to the full board, and then the people that voted for it in the committees vote against it in board meetings. So getting a little irritated, if you can't tell. But anyway, I will not be voting on any of this because not all nonprofits are created equal, because some of them do we actually are contracting services through them. So that's what people aren't taking into account, and we sometimes get matching funds for those. So no, I will not be, we haven't looked into any of this, and now we're just gonna make a on-the-cuff call on this after it went through a standing committee and was 7-0 vote. So I will not be voting yes on any amendments.
Okay, we're at the point of voting on the amendment to the amendment, or excuse me, amendment on the amendment. So there's an amendment to the amendment exclusively, in this case, removing NCCAP and any reference to NCCAP as a duplicate to the other resolution where it is mentioned. Is everybody clear on the vote? Again, the amendment is to remove NCCAP and any reference to it. Everybody clear? Anybody have questions? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Now, as amended, with the amendment now is to include a reduction not less than equal to, funding equal to the 2023 budget level and not less than 8% below that funding, similar to all of the other nonprofit funding changes and resolution verbiage that has been offered. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? All right, we will proceed to vote. Now we'll proceed, and the motion is carried. Moving on to, excuse me, we've got now we've got to vote on the resolution as amended. Is there any further discussion on the motion as amended? Everyone clear? We'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed, and the motion is carried. Now we will move on to Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee, Environmental Resources Committee, Parks Commission, resolution approving funding for the Ice Arena feasibility study for conceptual planning, resolution 48-23. Supervisor Robinson.
Mr. Chair, I'm requesting that this item be pulled and returned to the Human Resource Finance Property Committee. We've had, after the last meeting, reached out to the city in the mayor and about potentially sharing in the funding of the study, and she's indicated that it would need to go through the proper committees, and she's indicated a willingness to do so. So we're going to see if the city will be a financial partner. So we're going to pull it and see if we can obtain additional funding.
That item is being pulled, so we move on. Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee, and Health and Human Services Committee, Resolution J21, which is a request for additional social services, CLTS and CCS related positions. Resolution 49-23. Motion by Supervisor Hart and seconded by Supervisor Robinson. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had asked a question last week if there are projections beyond 2023. I don't know if we have that information available. We didn't receive anything by email. I just don't know if that is. We have the Social Services Director here. Krista,
do you have any response to that as far as
That was
projections?
it was in reference to the wait list.
In reference to the wait list. I understand. Understand the question.
Yes, we do not.
Could you please pick a mic, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We do not have projections for the wait list beyond 2023.
Thank you. I had additional questions.
Additional follow-up, Supervisor Dickinson, please.
So in the sixth whereas, second paragraph, there's a statement in there that says if the positions are filled, it says, will require no additional tax levy funding if the positions are filled in a way to ensure that each position is 100% funded by case management revenues. And I'm wondering, what does that mean? How would we know if they were or were not funded by case management revenues? If we don't get the revenue, then where is that coming from?
The Corp Counsel will address the.
So I can answer part of that. The now therefore be it resolved sections. I specifically drafted that in a way so that it requires that these positions are filled in such a way that funding is fully provided by non-tax levy sources and that the positions remain 100% non-tax levy funded. So this resolution creates the positions but does not allow them to be funded by a tax levy. That's the way I drafted it based on my understanding of what the request was, and I think, Krista, that's consistent.
Krista, please.
Yes, I would confirm. That is the desire of the department. All positions will be fully funded. There will be no tax levy that goes into any of these positions.
The end result is if the funding from the state for the CLTS program and the CCS program were to dissipate or expire, those positions would have to also go away.
That is correct.
Or find a source other than tax levy.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. And then I just had one additional. When we talk about the funding of these positions, does that include benefits? And in addition, I would assume that the county would assume all overhead costs, facility costs, travel reimbursement, items like laptops and all that, all those kind of standard overhead costs. Where does that money come from?
Krista, please.
Yes, I can confirm. So we create a case management rate, which is then submitted to the state, who approves that. I had explained that at the educational meeting last week, Thursday. So all of the overhead is included in the costs. Computers, travel, all of those pieces are included. None of that is coming out of tax levy. You're welcome.
Okay. Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So, for those of you who were still here at 11 o'clock on Thursday, I had sent a proposed amendment to this, and I'm apologizing to Supervisor Boots in advance because I do listen to all the meetings, but I cannot make them to all the meetings, so I can't answer the questions at the standing committee meetings. And I know that the director has answered some of those questions, and I'm not sure if we want to give her an opportunity to show the PowerPoint she sent out. But I got feedback from several supervisors, and they asked me to clarify where I came up with the whereases. So essentially, just to summarize before I go into that, my concern was that the list of 78 children on the wait list, on the referral list, is a 21% increase in 4 months relative to the 371 that we have at the end of the year. And I think that we should be concerned that if we have a 21% increase in disabled, handicapped children in 3 months, that's a pretty significant thing, and we should be looking at what the root causes of that are. So I did, I would say cursory research on the DHS website. I've sent some links to a deputy administrator, if you could put the first one up. While he's doing that, I'll read the whereases. So I came up with some potential root causes of the large increase, which could include changes in environmental factors. I don't really have any source for that, but I think that, you know, it's well established that pollution and other environmental hazards can cause cancer and birth defects, that type of thing. So, you know, if that's something that's causing this increase, then I think that's something we would definitely want to know about. Also, I put in changes in program eligibility requirements. I'm, you know, happy to vote for a program that provides services to handicapped children, disabled children. I'm not necessarily in favor of a program that is expanding welfare for children that are not handicapped or disabled. So I'm just trying to make sure that that's not what this is doing. Also, changes in who can refer the children to this program. The next one would be an influx of eligible children into Marathon County. And that, you know, could be from various sources. I have been told that other counties have transferred not children, but individuals into our county that need services. So just looking at to see whether that is happening or not. And then if there's like vaccine injury or to the parents or the children. So if you look at the, this is the page that I was looking at. This is the correct page for the program? Is that correct?
This is the state's page for the program, that's
Okay.
correct.
One of the things that I had questioned was, I would, you know, be interested in hearing more information on is, if you look at the services for children with delays or disabilities. So I'm not asking you to click on it, I'm just commenting, so if you could hit back. You know, if it's developmental delays, does that mean they should be walking at a year, but they're not walking at 15 months, you know, or whatever? I mean, is that, you know, how severe are the disabilities and delays? If you can scroll down a little bit. Okay, click on the next link then. That's the only point I had on there. So this is who can join. Younger than 22, be eligible for Wisconsin Medicaid, live at home in foster care or another approved setting, and need a level of care that people get at a hospital, a nursing home, or institution for people with developmental disabilities. And this was where I had used a term that we didn't, it's not accurate, so that's where I got it from, is that the institution. And then the ability to get safe, required care at home or in the community. So I definitely, you know, prefer for the children, you know, for children to be able to stay at home and not be put in a hospital and nursing home. So I mean, I don't have an objection to that at all. I fully support that. The question I have is that still the standard that to be in this program, that they need a level of care that they can get at a hospital or nursing home or in an institution for people with developmental disabilities? Next link. So can you zoom in a little bit? So this was where we were at the end of last year, according to the DHS website. And if you look, you know, it's about a 6%. And, you know, some other counties, Dane County is like 25%. So I think I'm not saying we don't need to add people, but I think our social services department is doing a good job relative to other counties. So go to the next link. And this is a current, scroll down. So we're actually, according to the DHS website, we're in green. You know, there's a number of counties that are red and that show their enrollment status is behind. And, we're not red or orange, we're green. Now, I don't dispute that the reality is that we may not be green, but, part of the issues that were raised was that we were going to have corrective action, and then perhaps DHS isn't as up to date as we are. Okay, next slide, next link. So this is a summary of changes that occurred about a year ago in the program, and this was part of the reason that I looked at, is the program requirements changing? And that is adding additional children. I believe that now parents can refer their own children to the program, whereas perhaps previously it was medical professionals. I don't know if that's correct. That's a question I'd like to have. If you scroll down to the next page, there's at the top there's some additional inclusive enhancements would have been added to the program. So I believe, I didn't get a chance to fully look at the information that the director sent, but I believe she indicated that the changes probably did expand the number of children in the program. The last link. So this is the kind of the guide to be eligible. If you scroll down, there's, maybe you can zoom in a little bit on that, and then scroll down. So again, the aggression towards self or other high-risk behavior, lack of behavioral control. I just would like some reassurance that it's, a disability and not just. I guess what level of disability, what is, what actually, I have no feel for, what level of disability it takes to get into the program, and I'd like some clarity on that. Thank you.
Krista, if you want to respond to any of those, please, by all means.
Sure, I'll try to answer all of the questions. If I miss any throughout that, just please let me know. The last document that was up that you had referenced in regards to changing of the program was in regards to what items are eligible for waiver. It did not change any programmatic eligibility requirements, but rather it changed what program or what services this program can support. So you'll look through here that there's just different items that this can support. They relook at that every 5 years, and they update the waiver manual to identify different services and supports that families might benefit from to keep their children in home and in their community, to limit the need for them to have an out-of-home placement, whether that be through child welfare services or a hospital setting or an institution. So that's what this document is really showing, is not changes to the eligibility requirements for the program, but it is changes to what is waiver eligible services. There was reference to, at some point, did the eligibility requirements change? And in 2020, I reference in an email that you received from me with a PowerPoint that in 2020 there were updates made to the eligibility requirements to be reflective of what is written in state statute. So they were not in compliance previously. In 2020, they became in compliance with what the law said for services that they had to provide. In 2021 is when they made the continuous enrollment change, meaning that children could no longer sit on the wait list, be evaluated, say yes, you are eligible for programs, and then sit on another wait list to actually receive services. They determined that once you determine a child is eligible, they must move into continuous enrollment and receive services. So that is the change that happened in 2021 for the program waiver that you might have seen previously. Could you share your other questions that you might have had? Or you could share the PowerPoint that does reference the questions that were in Supervisor Baker's resolution to me. Did identify those?
Well, there weren't really questions in the resolution. There was just, well, there were questions. Is basically the main question is, can we identify, and I think you answered that we can't, but can we identify what's causing this large increase in disability is the primary question.
I cannot identify for you what is causing the increase in children receiving or having disabilities. That would be a significant undertaking of significant research by probably people with many more letters behind their names than I do have. It is a statewide trend that all counties are seeing an increase in the children needing to be served. The reality for us is that we don't know why. You know, we could make a lot of assumptions as to why, but we don't have a reason specifically, nor is that our duty. Our duty is to serve the children who the state has determined are eligible to receive these services under the Medicaid waiver. And so we are seeking to be in compliance with what they're asking for us to have continuous enrollment, to not have children sit on our wait list, and ultimately it doesn't cost our county anything. Whereas if we do not pursue these positions, I believe that this will cost the county money in the long run because we are serving children who are highly vulnerable. We are serving families who have a significant amount of stress and service needs due to the children that are in their home. And so by us being able to provide them these services, we reduce that stress on their families. We ensure children can have their daily needs met, that they can function here in our community, and that we don't have to place them in out-of-home care through the child welfare system, which does cost our county money through tax levy to pay for those placements.
Supervisor Stravinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the documentation and the knowledge that you shared. I'm going to do two things here. First of all, I'm going to comment just briefly on, we talk about, well, we have no idea why we're seeing this huge increase, but yet we continue to do the same things that we've done for the last 20 years. Somebody much smarter than I once said something along the lines of, if you continue to do the same thing over and over and over again and you expect different results, that's one definition of insanity. And I'm going to submit that what we're doing, and I understand where you're coming from, and it's a very compassionate, and I understand that compassion, and I agree with that. I'd like to think I'm a compassionate person, but we are not solving any problems. Not only are we not solving any problems, we're watching the problems get worse as we build a bigger bureaucracy. So that to me is the definition of we're going backwards. And when we look at some of the requirements in this program, and I understand to some extent we are given those, they're not yours to define. Some of these, and then I look at the behaviors that our teachers and administration and support staff deal with in the school districts, and there's all school districts. The level of violent behavior that we are seeing tells me that I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy that this is a disability. If there's a disability involved, it's a lack of parental discipline. It's a lack of having a real parent who understands the concept of disciplining and raising their child. That's the disability that child suffers from. It's not something that the child themselves has any issues with. Now, am I a psychological or mental health professional or social work professional with a number of degrees behind my name? No, I am not. I am a mechanical engineer with a degree in common sense, if you will. So I'm speaking from observation. Excuse me, from observation. I lost my documentation there. The other thing that I'd like to address is that looking at the numbers involved here, we're looking at positions that are just this side of $106,000 each. I can guarantee you that the average positions, the average salary in Marathon County is nowhere near $106,000. So we can talk about the fact that, well, oh, look, this is coming from the state. We're not paying for it locally. Wrong. Every single taxpayer in the state of Wisconsin is ultimately paying for these types of positions, whether we pay for it locally through our municipalities, whether we pay for it through our taxes at the county level or we send our taxes to the state level and then it comes back, we're still paying for these positions. So the notion that, well, the state's going to pay for it and it's sort of magic money, we don't have to worry about that, is an absolute fiction. So with that in mind, I'm going to offer an amendment that we strike the 6 social worker positions and we replace that with 4. We strike the supervisor position and we allow the accounting specialist position to remain. So we would have 4 social worker positions, strike the supervisor, and the accounting position remains unchanged. Thank you.
The amendment is offered. Is there a second? Is there a second? Seeing none, the motion dies due to a lack of a second, and we're back to the motion as presented. Supervisor Zhang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start off by saying that there is an African proverb that states that it takes a village to raise a child. It's very important to note that I acknowledge a lot of the concerns that were brought up by my fellow colleagues, especially in regards to addressing the root cause of the problem at the root cause. But I think we can do this in 2 prongs approach. Looking and identifying that issue, but at the same time addressing the wait list that's currently we're facing at this moment here. It's very important to note that while we're arguing about funding for this position, it's very important to note, as Director Jensen has mentioned, it costs us nothing locally. It comes from the state and the federal government. The funding, the position that we're looking to hire is at market rate $65,000. It comes out to be $100,000 due to the benefits that comes with it as well. We have to remember that it is extremely hard to find individuals that would be qualified to work in this position as well. You need to find the right individual. So we need to be attractive and be able to attract other individuals that would be able to come and work in this field, to work in these high intense cases. It's also very important to note that, as Director Jensen mentioned, if we don't address these issues now, these students, these kids, will eventually end up in our CPS, end up being out of home placement, and that's going to cost us even a lot more dollars from the tax levy as well too. This is a mandated service from my understanding as well, and we've always talked about making sure that what we are funding is mandated by the state, and it is mandated by the state. It meets all the criteria that this board has always talked about making sure that that whatever we do is a mandated service, that we do at almost no cost to our taxpayers. And that's one thing that the Social Services Department has excelled in, is addressing and servicing the needs of our families at the lowest cost possible. So I will be voting in support of this. I would encourage my fellow colleagues, if they have continued to have these, to continue to have this discussion, and they're welcome to bring it to the Social Services Board for further discussion as well. Thank you.
Going back to the one question that Supervisor Shafinsky brought up, and that was the $106,000 cost, and I would remind the supervisors that Supervisor Dickinson wanted, and rightfully so, that we correctly cost identify all overhead, including benefits, and that's how you get to the $106,000 cost, is all benefits, including health insurance, including retirement that the county has to provide for those, and overhead for computers, mileage, and the like. Next is Supervisor Boots.
Call a question.
Question's been called. Is there any objection to question being called? There's an objection. Is there a second to question being called? The question being called is seconded by Supervisor Ritter. It is not debatable. There is a number of individuals on the list that will be recognized to speak, even if the question is successful, and those are Supervisor Sandolsky, Supervisor Krause, Supervisor Robinson, Supervisor Hart, Supervisor Langenhan, Supervisor Marash, and Supervisor Vensky. So we are at the point of question being called, ending debate, accepting the fact that those individuals on the wait list will be identified and allowed to comment on the item. Is everybody clear? We're voting on ending debate. It does require a 2/3 majority. We'll proceed. And we'll proceed. And the motion does pass. So we have people on the list. Supervisor Sandolsky.
So yeah, I got a question related to the root cause again. Has there ever been any research looked into the increase in the childhood vaccine schedule in relation to the increase in autism and disabilities within kids? Because you look back at the 80s, if you look at the autism numbers, the disabilities and all that, and the vaccine schedules were much lower. I don't have the numbers on me, but they were a handful of vaccines back in the 80s, and now I believe they're in, I don't have the numbers, but I believe it's around 80 some vaccines. Has that ever been looked into?
I am uncertain as to if that research has occurred. It's not research that our department would complete. Possibly public health or something of the like has completed that.
Supervisor Krause.
Thank you, Chair. In my reading and also watching videos and many sources that I've come across, because I try to keep up on everything and I do like several hours of research a day, that part of the problems with young children and teenagers and so on is the result of what's happened with COVID. These children are carrying on mental issues because of this, the schooling problems, the stress their parents have gone through. So a lot of these children have anxiety, they have paranoia, they have fear, they've got depression, their lack of socialization from being at home instead of in school and trying to do their schoolwork on laptops or whatever. They lack socialization skills, communication skills. They've been isolated from their friends, neighbors, or whatever. And like in school, there's a lot of socialization and contact. And they haven't had any of that sitting at home day after day, month after month. And so there are developmental delays. Some of these children act out then in aggression, but they have emotional problems, and that's nothing new because we know that's increased in high schools. We know that we've put psychiatrists into schools, psychologists and counselors to help some of these children. We know how many of them are acting out with shooting and coming into the schools and killing students. So there are a lot of emotional problems that have come up as a result of COVID. And so this is what I have learned and read from many magazines and articles and television, radio, and videos and so on. So I know we're not school teachers. We're not in with these students. Well, when school was gone, when we didn't have school, there weren't teachers around then to really be personally interacting so much with these
Supervisor Krause,
young
I'd ask
people.
you to bring this discussion back to the point of the motion in front of us, and that is to increase the social workers and the staff around the support staff, including the accounting and the supervisory
So that's
provision.
why we need all of these social workers, and that's how the need has increased. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to next. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, and I want to just start out by thanking the staff at Social Services for the outstanding job that they do in dealing with people with special needs and in difficult situations. This issue really is about kids and families. It's not about staff. It's how do we provide the support to those families to allow them to have less trauma, to find the support that they need to advance those kids. If you look at the data that we received today, you saw that there's a significant increase at age 3 when the Birth to 3 program ends and they transition into this program. What we're being asked today is to deal with the issue of backlog. If you have come to the conclusion that you need help, and for most families, that takes a lot of time. You don't walk in one day and say, I need help. It is, I'm struggling. What do I do? You reach out to friends, you reach out to families, you reach out to social workers, healthcare professionals, you get a referral, and then you act. And there's a significant amount of time between the recognition that there's a problem to actually taking action on it. This proposal tries to deal with the backlog. Those families that come in and have recognized the need and have reached out to any number of referral sources, and they need that help yesterday, not today, not tomorrow, but yesterday. And we're trying to support those families. And this is not your traditional mandate. It really is, here is a program. We're asking you to administer it. We are creatures of the state, and the state is providing through state and federal dollars 100% of the funding necessary to address the situation, to work for those kids and those families, to reduce the trauma and stress and support those families, and most importantly, to help those children most vulnerable and most in needs. I would strongly encourage you to do this. This will be phased in over a period of time if we don't need all the positions. Administrator Leonard has said, and Krista has said, that they won't fill all the positions. It will be based upon the backlog, evening out workload, and addressing those critical needs.
Supervisor Hart, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In this discussion, I've heard a lot about trying to get to the point, and I think to the root causes of this, and I think that's a novel thing. But I do also want to point out kind of the irony of this board is a lot of the mitigating programs that could prevent a child from becoming disabled, it's probably not mandated. And I know we've had a lot of discussions about mandated versus not mandated. Nurse family practitioner, we voted in the last budget to cut the funding for that. That is something that would have prevented children from becoming disabled, and we decided to cut that. There was discussion when I first came on the board to cut therapists in schools or prevent the health department from having a coordinator. That would prevent children from potentially becoming disabled as well. So when we go down that road of talking about preventing it, I want us to also be aware of what's mandated and not mandated. And then to bring that back to the point here, this is a mandated service, and we have a choice here that we either meet our mandate to care for the children in this county who have disabilities, or we let the state decide how we meet that mandate for us because of this board's potential inaction. So I want us to, I would hate for us to, we talk about how previous boards have hampered us because of, applying things that we now have to deal with. I would hate for us to have to not take action tonight and then potentially hamper a future board by having to take action that we didn't. Thank you.
Supervisor Longenhahn, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't intend on speaking on this topic tonight, but there were a lot of really great points made between last Thursday night and this evening. I just want to offer my approach to the situation. And I don't have a phrase and I don't have a proverb, but I have an analogy. So please imagine, if you will, that your house is burning down. When that happens, you immediately call the fire department to put the fire out. You don't stop that phone call to the fire department to figure out what the root cause of the fire was while the fire is burning. After the fire is put out, you can gather the facts to determine what the source of that fire was. And I'm not going to explain the parts of that analogy. I trust you all can determine those for yourselves. The other thing I want to encourage is that those supervisors that have brought up the root causes before, please work with the Health and Human Services Committee if this is something that you would like to study. Or please encourage the state of Wisconsin to look into those root causes so that we can better plan in the future. The last thing I'll say is, please don't lose sight of what I believe the true intent of this initiative is. We're providing flexibility to our staff to address a problematic backlog of cases. This is an opportunity for the board to truly do some good, which is helping children with disabilities. I think that the vote is clearly yes, Mr. Chair. I'd encourage my colleagues to vote yes for this, and thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Marash, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment is echoing many of the others that were already made tonight, but in reference to looking for the why the children are being plagued by these increased disabilities or chronic health conditions, we can't do that, and the social services can't do that. It's not our Board of Health can't do that because we are an arm of the state. So if you're not happy with not knowing the answers to why we have vaccine injuries or why no one's looked into vaccines or why we have increased disabilities, it's up to the state. So that's who we need to go after to get these answers. So that's all I wanted to say because it frustrates me just as much as it does everybody else. And I will vote in favor of helping the kids in our area. Thank you.
Supervisor Vensky is last but not least. Supervisor Vensky, please. Pardon me?
I was going to call the question.
All right. We are now done. Question has been called and voted on and approved. And so now we are at the point of voting on the motion to approve Resolution 49-23, and that is the request for additional social services, CLTS, and CCS related positions. Is everybody clear what the voting on? All right, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Niemeyer, you're online. You're the only one that we're waiting on. Can you vote? She was granted authority. Supervisor Niemeyer was granted authority to attend the meeting virtually and vote. Supervisor Niemeyer, you're still there? Can you give me your vote verbally? And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, and we will proceed on. It did require a 2/3 majority and did receive the 2/3 majority. We're down to announcements and/or requests. And the clerk has requests for signatures from every committee except executive. And a request that you please review and check your mailbox. There's stuff that has been placed in the mailbox. Any other announcements and/or requests? Supervisor Straw, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During the night, I've heard some comments from my colleagues about how to go about making motions and this and that. Is it possible that the county clerk could furnish a pocket-sized book of Robert's Rules of Orders and distribute them to the supervisors? Thank you.
We can't discuss it, but I will put it on the, potentially put it on the executive committee for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Lamont, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at the public safety thing that needed to be signed, and I think it was changed tonight.
We're getting,
Okay.
Kelly went to get
Thank
it
you.
off the printer.
Okay, any other announcements and/or requests? Okay, we are down to the infamous item number 23. Motion by Supervisor Opal and seconded by Supervisor Lamont to adjourn All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We gotta wait to get the new resolution. I apparently didn't get